Alright, welcome to your Test 2 review. Just like last time, the test will be open from Monday to Friday at 11:59 p.m. So you have the whole week to take it. You have the whole week to review and watch this review lecture, go over the previous lectures, review your notes and things like that. So whatever you need to do to prepare for the test, I'm sure you guys will do well. I was very impressed with the grades overall last time, so just keep up the good work and we should have no problems at all. So let's go ahead and begin your Test 2 review. And we'll begin with week 6. It's been quite a while since week 6. It's been a little over a month, I believe, with spring break and things like that. So on week 6, if you remember, we talked about the Texas legislature. We first began with the Texas legislature, and we talked about what are the functions of the legislative body. And so this is for all legislative bodies, Congress, the Texas legislature, other state legislatures as well. All legislative bodies serve these four main functions. First of all, they articulate the general demands of a society. So whatever society needs to take care of or whatever needs to be done, the demands of the society should be articulated through the legislative body. Legislative bodies represent the needs of special segments of society, whether organized or unorganized. So particular demographics such as veterans, or maybe you can think of a racial or ethnic minority as well, gender issues, things like that. Or maybe even a particular political issue such as the environmental movement and things like that, organized or unorganized. However, organized or unorganized, the legislative body represents the needs of that particular special segment of society. Legislative bodies also frame and give approval to laws, so they're the ones that will draft the legislation, vote on it, and debate on it, and things like that. And then finally, they allocate the resources of society through taxing and spending. Most legislative bodies are responsible for revenue and budgets as well as tax policy, I guess you should say. So they're the ones that tax and spend and allocate money to this particular project or this particular need or demand. And that all comes through legislative bodies. So those are the four main functions of the legislative body. I can guarantee there will be a question on your test. It'll probably be something like, which one of these is not a normal function of a legislative body, and it's whichever one is one of these four. When we talk about the legislature, we need to talk about the different roles of representatives as well. Different representatives will view themselves in different ways, and they'll also take on different roles. There's the delegate, the trustee, the advocate, and then the politico. The delegate, first of all, is a representative who votes as she or he believes the district wants. They will see themselves as a delegate. They'll see themselves as someone that my constituents sent me here to represent their views. I should vote as they want me to. I'm simply here just to vote. They're the ones that will tell me what to do or how I should vote. I'm just here to vote in accordance with what they want. The trustee is someone that will vote consistent with their own personal beliefs. This is much more of a, they voted me here, they obviously trust my judgment and my character. I will vote how I believe I should vote because they trust me to vote as they see fit. The advocate, on the other hand, is one that votes for the wishes of major supporters and contributors. So this is someone who is kind of, for lack of a better term, I would say a puppet within the legislature. They're the ones that will listen to those which support them the most. And so you can kind of see an advocate maybe is somewhat corrupt, but also this major supporter or major contributor may be someone that has a very important role within, say, the local economy or something like that. Finally, a politico is someone that has a combination of all three roles, and so sometimes they'll vote as a delegate, sometimes they'll vote as a trustee, sometimes they'll vote as an advocate. And a politico is usually a very smart, candid politician, to be quite honest with you. I guess that's kind of the definition of a politico. So these are the four main types or roles of a representative, and at different times they may see themselves in different lights. When we talked about representation in the legislature, we talked about different theories of representation as well. Not only do we talk about roles, there's also different theories of how the legislature or a legislative body should be made up. And the first one is the sociological representation, and this is in stark contrast to agency representation. Sociological representation will look at the demographics and say that demographics matter. Race, gender, class similarities means the representative is better at representing. So if you have a legislator which is kind of mirrors the demographics or mirrors the makeup of society, that's better at representing diverse views. Different cultures, different professions, different genders. if you have a legislative body that is similar to those, they're going to have at least a voice in the legislative body, and they're going to have. Therefore, the theory would be that they would have better representation because they do have a voice. And they have each kind of view is represented in the legislative body. Religious distribution is close to the population at large. However, when you look at the women and the minorities within the Texas legislature, we're a little bit off. In the Texas legislature, there's only 37 women, and this is nowhere near the percentage of women that are within the Texas demographics. Minorities are also underrepresented as well. It has improved some. Minorities make up around 38% of the Texas legislature. And this is in contrast to the demographics, which, remember, when we talked about Texas demographics, Texas is a minority-majority state. Racial and ethnic minorities make up the majority of the population in Texas, but only make up 38% of the Texas legislature. Also, within the Texas legislature, you have a difference on types of professions as well. Typically, you have law or business within the Texas legislature. You have a few farmers and teachers and things like that. But overall, the percentage of lawyers and businessmen in the Texas legislature nowhere near the makeup of lawyers and businessmen within the Texas population. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there just a little bit. The percentage of lawyers and businessmen in the Texas legislature nowhere make up the percentage of lawyers and businessmen in the population at large. So, for sociological representation, Texas lags a little bit behind. However, some would say that doesn't matter, and this is where agency representation comes in. Agency representation says that members should simply do the best job that they can. Legislatures are not a sociological representative assembly. The best agents, I guess, or representatives are not necessarily demographically correct. What matters is that they're just doing their job. So if you subscribe to sociological representation, that demographics matter and that a legislative body should mirror the demographics of its people, then Texas lags behind. In terms of agency representation, I guess that's kind of up to your judgment how well they're doing. But most people would say, well, as long as they're doing their job, then that's what really matters. So when you look at the Texas legislature itself, it lags behind sociologically, but maybe doing a fair job in terms of agency representation. All right, so let's look at the structure of the legislature itself. The legislature is bicameral, meaning that there's two chambers. There's a Senate and then there's a House. The Senate has 31 members, and they're elected for 4-year terms, overlapping terms for senators. And then the House, 150 members elected for 2-year terms, and all members run at the same time. So in the Senate, roughly 15 of them will run for this election, and then in 2 years another 15, and then in 2 years another 15. So they have overlapping terms. Only 15 of them roughly are up for election at the same time. The House, all 150 members run every 2 years. The sessions for the Texas legislature are 140 days every 2 years in an odd year. So if it's 2013, 2015, 2017, they're going to have their regular session, which is 140 days. That's not a whole lot of time. Not a whole lot can get done. And we talked about that when we talked about the citizen legislature. We'll talk about it again when we talk about the citizen legislature here in just a little bit. There are special sessions, though, and these are 30-day sessions when called by the governor. So if there's something didn't get resolved within those 140 days, the governor can call a special session. Let's say some sort of emergency arises and there's an issue we need to address right now, the governor can call a special session as well then, and they usually last for 30 days. So, with the citizen legislature, which is kind of which is kind of a nice segue talking about the regular sessions, we have a citizen legislature here in Texas, so we do have those limited session lengths. We also have low pay. Texas, you make $7,200 for every 2 years for every session that you're in. And then also with citizen legislature, you have limited staffing. So citizen legislature, low pay, limited length sessions, and also limited staffing. You can see the breakdown of Texas right down here. Contrast this with a professional legislature such as California, which you can see the statistics down here. Full professional legislatures have full-time members. You have no limits on sessions, and you have adequate staffing as needed. So California, the full-time members with good salary, $95,000 a year, Not a bad salary. You do have no limits on sessions as well. In California, they run from December to September. I'm sure since they're a full-time legislature, they could possibly be there even longer. And adequate staffing, which is as needed in California. So citizen legislature, the idea is that you have a very concentrated, sort of focused session and not a lot of pay because you don't want full-time politicians. Professional legislature, however, you want a full-time politician that can respond immediately to issues, that can be there in case there's casework or something that needs to be done. And you can just get a lot more done. You can have a much more open dialogue and things like that. However, you have a professional politician, and that may not be good because you need to pay the salary and things like that as well. So there's pros and cons to each. When we did the discussion board for this, you guys did actually a really, really good job of contrasting citizen legislature versus professional legislature. So I have no doubt that you guys can definitely answer those questions correctly on your test. But if you do have questions, be sure to send those my way, and I'll be happy to address those for you guys. Within the Texas legislature, we talked about the duties of the legislature. First off, their legislative duty is that they pass laws. They also propose amendments to the Constitution by 2/3 votes of the chambers. They serve an electoral function as well, which is meaning they hold regular elections and they have regular campaigns to inform voters about the issues. Directory and supervisory functions, they do audit committees, they do the Sunset Commission, they just direct and supervise particular agencies of government. Investigatory function, sorry, butchered that word there. Investigatory function is just that they explore or research particular issues or particular circumstances that may arise. Impeachment, they can impeach the governor. And then finally, service for constituents. They can provide casework for the constituents that may be having a hard time getting a permit or something like that. They provide those services for constituents to try to expedite the process or expedite the situation that is going on within their constituents. With their constituents, I guess I should say, excuse me. All right. Leadership within the Texas legislature, we talked about the House. Within the House, you have a Speaker, which is elected by the members, currently Joe Strauss. You have the Speaker pro tem, which is appointed by the Speaker. This is Dennis Bonnen, who is actually a representative for many of you guys in my class. And then you have different officers which are appointed by the Speaker as well. In the Senate, you have the Lieutenant Governor. This is someone who is elected by voters. Currently, it's Dan Patrick. You have the President pro tem, who is elected by the Senate. Usually, it's the most senior member of the Senate, and this is currently Juan Hinojosa. Sorry, probably butchered that name as well. And then you have different Senate officers as well. So for the purpose of your test, just know that the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor are the main two officials in the House and the Senate, respectively. And that should get you through the test right there. Types of committees in the Texas legislature, I'll probably just ask a question about a few of these. I'll mix and match them, I guess. You have the standing committees, which are membership is established at the beginning of the session. Standing committees usually deal with an issue that is permanent and kind of it's going to last there for a long time. These are issues such as agriculture, transportation. You have special committees, which are created with a special mandate. They serve to investigate a particular situation. Interim committees, study committees, they operate during the interim only, so when the legislature is not in session. And then finally, statutory committees, which are established by law. These are actually in the Constitution of Texas, and these three are the Legislative Budget Board, the Legislative Council, and the Legislative Audit Committee. All three of those committees are established by the Constitution, put into law, and will be there until the law changes, I guess. So for the purpose of your test, just know at least the definition of a few of these, and that way when one of them appears on your test, you can be prepared for that answer. We also talked about the main steps of the legislative process. We'll just kind of run through these briefly. These are the main 7 or so steps that a bill or a resolution usually goes through in the Texas legislature. First off, it must be drafting the proposals. Introduction and referral. It's introduced to the floor for debate. It's also assigned to a committee at this time. Committee action decides whether it's worthy of floor debate or floor consideration, I guess I should say. And then if it does pass through committee, most bills will actually die in committee. Not many actually do escape committee, but if it does pass committee and committee deems it worthy to be on the floor for consideration, then it goes to the floor for consideration. You have a conference committee. A conference committee is just if there are two bills, if there's a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate that address the same issue but don't have the same wording, they'll have a conference committee to kind of hash out those differences. And then also, if it passes through the conference committee, it's passed through the floor, then it goes to the governor's action, in which he can veto it or approve it. If he vetoes it, there can be a seventh step here with the override of the veto, in which the legislature needs to vote to override that veto. As I mentioned in the lecture, this is very rare. It's only happened 2 times in 50 years, and that's because Texas is typically a one-party state. And so since they're a one-party state, whatever passes through the legislature will usually get accepted by the governor. If the governor does veto it, though, but it is deemed really important by the same party, then they'll go ahead and override the veto, but very, very rare. The governor's action is usually where most of this stops. It's usually approved, since the governor and the legislature tend to be of the same party. So just a brief overview of the main steps of the legislative process. I wouldn't expect too many troubles with test questions in terms of the main steps of the legislative process. So you guys should be good to go. All right. So talking about governor's approval, governor's veto, and things like that, that leads us very nicely into week 7, in which we talked about the governor and the plural executive. First off, before we get into the actual Texas governor and the plural executive, we need to talk about the functions of any executive branch. The functions of the executive branch is first of all, wow, I'm really mixing my words today. First of all, is the administration of laws. They execute the laws as written by the legislature and carry out those laws. Elaboration of laws, policy making, if the governor doesn't quite, or if the governor or the executive branch needs to kind of overthink a law or needs to address something that has arisen, they'll consider the elaboration of laws or policy making. Political leadership, policy initiation. The executive branch also has certain judicial powers in terms of clemency. They can grant pardons, reprieves, commutations, or paroles, which simply means that as soon as a decision is reached by the court and the governor may not agree with the court, then he can issue a pardon or a reprieve or a commutation. The executive branch is also symbolic and ceremonial. Often the head of the executive branch, whether that be the president or a governor, it's often a symbolic or a ceremonial position. They'll attend balls, they'll attend banquets, they'll recognize outstanding citizens and things like that. So it's also a very symbolic and ceremonial position as well. For the Texas governor, there's written qualifications within the Constitution. First of all, you must be 30 years of age. You must have been a U.S. citizen, and you must have been a resident of Texas for at least 5 years. So 3 qualifications, and they generally kind of mirror the qualifications for U.S. president as well. Nice little compensation for the governor. There's a $150,000 salary. This is actually above the national average, so it is a pretty nice salary. There's also housing and transportation perks as well. They're elected to 4-year terms, and there's no limit on the amount of times you can run. So there's no limits on your terms, basically. So you have the most recent ex-governor, I guess I should say, Rick Perry, who was governor for 14 years. He was elected to 4-year terms and saw that there was no limit on his term, so he decided to run again. So he was governor for 14 years, and currently it is Greg Abbott. So we'll see. Greg Abbott was lieutenant governor under Rick Perry, so we'll see how long he stays in office as well. Comparatively, though, the Texas governor is actually one of the weakest. Institutional powers granted by the Constitution are actually really limited. Now, we'd like to think of the Texas governor as someone that's really powerful, particularly with Rick Perry being in office so long. But the main reason for that is the idea of personality politics. You usually have strong mandates. Usually the governor gets elected by an overwhelming majority. And so he has a strong mandate, meaning that the people voted for me at a high rate, so clearly the people want me to carry out the policies in which I laid out in my campaign. And because he has this strong mandate, he can actually kind of bully the legislature just a little bit to get things passed that he wants passed. Also, Texas governors are usually seen as having a lot of political ambition. You have people such as George W. Bush, who ran for president as soon as his term of governor was over. Also, Rick Perry is talking about a presidential election in 2016, and he also ran in 2012. So often Texas governors are seen as strong because they have high political ambition. There's also a lack of term limits, so they can stick around. They can kind of establish themselves in Texas politics. And then also kind of going along with the political ambition is the idea that they have a huge national spotlight. Many people will turn their eyes to Texas and kind of see what's going on in Texas. And so therefore the governor gets a lot of the national spotlight. So that's why the Texas governor seems very, very powerful. But in terms of actual powers granted to it by the Constitution, it's actually very, very weak. Institutional powers, I guess you should say, are very weak. And this is where Thad Bale, he gave the Texas governorship a rating of 2.8 out of 5. And there are 36 other governors that, on this scale, have more power than the Texas governor. So on the face, it seems like the Texas governor is very, very strong because of their personality and their national spotlight attention. But in reality, institutionally speaking, they're not very strong. And so that will probably be the question on your test is, how does the Texas governorship compare to other governorships nationwide? Now, classifications of powers within the Texas governorship, you have the legislative power in which they can veto legislative bills. They can call special sessions of the legislature. They can address the legislature in the State of the State address. And they can also declare legislative emergencies as well. They have judicial power going through the 3 branches of government. They have judicial power in terms of clemency powers, which we already talked about in the form of pardons, reprieves, and stays of execution. And then they have obviously their own executive powers, being part of the executive branch, obviously. They have appointment and removal powers of particular officers. There's budgetary concerns that the executive can consider. Often they will submit their own version of a budget. And then there's directory and supervisory. They oversee a lot of the bureaucracy. And then there's military and law enforcement powers as well. The executive controls the National Guard as well as many of the Texas Rangers and state law officers as well. So those are all within the executive powers. Really, the governorship kind of has a hand in each branch of government, more or less. And that's because of the system of the checks and balances, which is very, very common within the United States. So that's the Texas governorship. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the plural executive. Texas is unique. Most of the time, states do not have separate agencies that are independent of the governor. Texas does. Texas wanted to make the governor really, really weak. They didn't like the executive power. They didn't want the government telling them what to do. They didn't want to create this kind of sort of king or tyrant as they saw it. So they set up the plural executive to take powers away from the governorship. In most states, these agencies are included under the governorship. Instead, in Texas, you have the plural executive, which establishes these agencies independent of the governor, which take on some of the responsibilities of a normal governor. It's established to make the governor weaker, and they may even be of a different political party. Normally they're not. Texas being such a Republican state, normally they're not of a different political party. Often you'll have a clean sweep of the Republicans nowadays. It used to be you'd have a clean sweep of the Democrats as well. So the agencies included under the plural executive are the Lieutenant Governor, the Attorney General, the Comptroller of Public Accounts, the Commissioner of General Land Office, and the Commissioner of Agriculture. The question on your test will probably be something like, which one of these does not belong in the plural executive, and you'll answer whichever one is not one of these 5 right here. So that's the idea of the plural executive. And during the lecture, we went through each of these and kind of what they did. I don't really feel like it's important for you to know what each of these do. Just know that the plural executive is something very, very unique to Texas, and know which of these offices comprise the plural executive, or make up the plural executive, I guess I should say. So hopefully for your test, you'll be good to go on the plural executive. And now we'll move in to week 8. Week 8, we talked about campaigns, votings, and elections. And so there's kind of a lot to cover here, but it'll be good to go through this again. In week 8, we talked about how much money is really in politics and how much money is even in Texas politics. I mean, it's on a greater scale nationwide, but in Texas, a very serious campaign for a statewide office is very, very expensive. We talked about the 2012 GOP Senate primary. This was the primary. I mean, this was just to get the nomination of the Republican Party. We talked about the Senate primary in which Ted Cruz spent $7 million. David Dewhurst spent almost nearly double or almost nearly triple of that and lost. He spent $19 million and lost. Cruz spent far less money than his Democratic opponent in the general election, but just to win the primary, just to win the nomination, he had to spend $7 million. Also, compared to David Dewhurst's $19 million, it's really not all that much. So I feel a little bad for David Dewhurst, I guess you should say. But that's because Texas is such a serious state, it's such a big state. So winning a prestigious seat, such as the Senate, it bodes very well for your political career, I guess I should say. And there's also a lot of outside money in Texas politics as well. In the governor election, there was a lot of outside money. And also for this Senate primary, you can see here that outside PACs poured millions directly into advertising for this race, above and beyond the actual campaign spending. So lots of money going into campaigns and elections here in Texas. Let's go ahead and talk about why they're so costly. First of all, you have extensive travel by airplane. Often by airplane, I guess you should say. But you have extensive travel. Texas is a big state. You can travel 12 hours in one direction and still be in the state. There's also a large number of media markets. You have to compete in at least 5 different main media markets, maybe even more. I can think of Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, El Paso. Those are often the main media markets that people will point to. There's probably even further south, probably Brownsville and things like that as well. You also require experienced campaign professionals to run them, so you have to hire a professional campaign staff to run your campaign. It can be quite expensive. And then also polling the large electorate is very expensive. Polling costs money. You need to pay firms to conduct these polls and things like that. So in order to pay for those sorts of polling numbers, can get very expensive. So travel, media, campaign professionals, and also polling agencies can get quite expensive, and that's the main reason why Texas campaigns are so costly. Texas campaign strategies overall, they mirror national campaigns. You want to focus on battleground areas. You want to be sure to go into battleground areas, duke it out with your opponents, try to sway more votes in your favor. Similar to national elections, which will focus on battleground states such as Ohio and Virginia and Florida. Fundraising, you need to conduct a lot of fundraising. You need strong support. Debates are very important. Statewide debates here in Texas, I've noticed, have gotten a lot more attention than, say, a statewide debate in my home state of Kansas. Debates are very important, and they're often televised. Don't screw it up. Easiest advice to give a politician. Don't screw it up. Same way with a national campaign as well. And in Texas campaigns, as most political campaigns do, feature stump speeches as well. Stump speeches are just simple 20-minute versions of speeches, often well-rehearsed and well-written, that give the candidates' views on particular issues, but they're not off the cuff or things like that. They're just well-rehearsed, and they'll go into a place and give this stump speech and hopefully garner more support or gain more votes in that way. So stump speeches, you see a lot of politicians doing those as well. So, moving on. Oh, sorry, going back one side. Moving on here. The 3 basic strategies within campaigning here in Texas, like I said, mirror the national campaigns as well. So the campaigns mirror the national campaigns, but also the strategies. The 3 main strategies that we talked about are the party-centered strategy, which is sometimes called the Contract with America. I guess for better use here, I guess you should call it the Contract with Texas. And it's just focusing on what can we as Republicans offer the electorate, what can we as Democrats offer the electorate. It's basically trying to garner more votes for the party, and the candidate being part of the party will highlight what the party can do for America, I guess I should say, or for Texas. The issue-oriented strategy, the common phrase here is it's the economy stupid, and that will focus on a particular issue, usually the economy, because the economy matters to so many voters. But if there's a particular issue that needs to be addressed or is a hot-button issue at the time, often campaigns will implement the issue-oriented strategy where they focus on that particular issue and then try to show why they're the better candidate to tackle that issue. There's the image-oriented strategy as well. Some campaigns are starting to use this one. Most famously was the Obama campaign in 2008. It kind of presents this post-partisan idea that we're beyond politics. What we need to simply do is be bipartisan. We need to focus on what we can do if we work together, sort of thing. So it kind of provides this hope and this change kind of attitude, the Yes We Can slogan, which was popularized by the 2008 Obama campaign. And focuses on the candidate himself or herself and what they can do to end the partisan bickering and provide change within the say the nation or say the state. So those are the three basic strategies that most campaigns will implement. Election campaigns, sorry, I'm trying to read through the slide real quick. Election campaigns are contests by opposing candidates in elections in which candidates debate issues of public policy rather than personal insults and negative campaigns. So these would, I guess, would be the ideal campaign or election settings, I guess I should say. I talked about this originally in my lecture. I forgot that I had this slide in here, so forgive me, I'm a little off right now. But remember when I talked about, in the regular lecture, I talked about what the ideal campaign or ideal conditions for democracy were. Ideally, you would like an election campaign in which candidates actually debate issues of policy rather than personal insults and negative campaigns. You'd also like that voters are well informed and that voters would vote on the basis of policy issues. And you'd also like to have virtually universal participation, which, remember, when we talked about in the regular lecture, we talked about how Texas has very low voter turnout. We're going to address that here in just a little bit. Public elections are elections that are held by a governmental body, and they are used to decide issues or elect public officials. The type of public elections here that we have here in Texas are the partisan elections, which happen on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of an even year. I know that's a little wordy and confusing, but that's the way it's written into the law. Partisan elections, or general elections, happen the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November of an even-numbered year. So if November 1st falls on a Tuesday, then it can no longer be, then it cannot be the election date. Now you could have November 2nd because that falls after November 1st. So simply this is just simply to target November 1st, I guess, more or less. But that's the way it's written into the law. You also have nonpartisan elections, and this is just all other public elections in Texas. These usually sometimes happen in May, sometimes in March as well. So they happen that they're pretty much any election that is not on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. All right. I know that got a little wordy and confusing, so if you're confused by this point, I don't blame you. But if you do have questions, send them my way and I'll try to address them. All right. Texas voters select officials in all three branches. I remember talking about this, and I remember how I kind of mentioned that in Kansas, we don't really elect judges. So that's very unique to Texas, how Texas will elect particular judges. Because the idea is that you would want judicial officers to be nonpartisan and non-biased. You want them to simply apply the law as they see fit, rather than have it tied to a political agenda. So Texas is kind of unique in that Texas voters select officials from all three branches. Texas voters also vote on many more local offices than any other state. They vote on more offices than any other state that I've really ever seen. You know, they'll vote on things such as community college districts, public school districts, hospital districts. You know, it's a really extensive list. Dog catchers sometimes. I think it's fascinating that Texans can vote on that stuff as well. So state constitutional amendments and local tax policies as well. That's another thing that Texas voters vote on that is unique to Texas. So Texas, this slide is basically trying to highlight that Texas is very unique because they vote on officials in all three branches. They vote on a lot more local offices than any other state. And they also get the right to vote on constitutional amendments and also their local tax policies as well. So very, very unique for Texas. Moving from the campaigns and elections themselves, we need to talk about the different type of elections. First of all was the general election, and then second of all was the primary election. And then actually the primary elections happens before the general elections. So I'll go ahead and talk about the bottom half of this slide here first. The primary elections are held by the major parties. You have two candidates from the same party seeking the same nomination. So you have Republican versus Republican, and you have Democrat versus Democrat. Primary elections are held on the first Tuesday in March. So the first Tuesday in March, every first Tuesday in March on an even number of year usually, you'll have a primary election. If there needs to be a runoff, say someone did not get the majority vote, then you'll have a runoff on the second Tuesday in April. So you have a month to conduct your runoff campaign. The winners of primary elections, so the Republican that beat out the other Republican gets the nomination, and the Democrat that beat out the other Democrat gets the nomination. The winner of the primary elections goes on to face the other party's nomination in the general election. So let's flip up to the top half of this slide here. Governor and other major statewide contests coincide with the midterm elections. The midterm elections meaning elections that are not on a presidential year. So president elections happen on 2012, 2016, 2020. Midterm elections will happen in 2014, 2018, 2022. The general elections feature the winners of the primary election, so you have Republican versus Democrat, and it's deliberately scheduled this way to not coincide with the presidential race. You want to diminish the national partisan coattail effect, meaning you don't want to simply ride on the coattails of a very popular president or a popular national candidate. You also want to diminish the positive impact state candidate could offer national candidate. So if you have a really popular state candidate, say you have a really popular Democrat governor candidate, you don't want that to turn Texas blue anyway. So you don't want the popularity of a state candidate to affect the popularity of a nationwide candidate. So general elections feature party versus party, and they happen on midterm years. So hopefully that makes sense. The difference between primary elections and general elections. If you need anything, if you need me to clarify anything, I'd be more than happy to. Be sure to send those questions my way. How to determine winners. This is very important. We like to think that we vote and whoever gets the most votes wins, and usually that does happen. But there are different rules, and particularly here in Texas. It's very odd here in Texas that in Texas you need to have a majority. You need to have a majority winner. And this is used, like I said, this is used in the primary elections. And so this is why you'll sometimes have a runoff election in the primary. Majority winner rules basically say that the candidate must receive more votes than all other opponents combined. Meaning you must win at least 50% plus one. You must win a majority of the vote, more than half. You have to win more than half of the vote. Contrast this with the plurality. Plurality is used in the general election, and plurality simply states the candidates that receive the most votes wins. So it doesn't have to be more than half. It could be 40%. And just as long as the other candidate does not get more votes than you, or the other candidates do not get more votes than you, then you win. If there are more than two, a candidate may win without an absolute majority. So like I said, you could win with 40%. Let's say the winner gets 40%, the second runner-up, or the runner-up gets 30% of the vote, and then the second runner-up gets 10%. So you have 40, 30 plus 10 plus a certain percentage to other candidates as well. So you don't actually have to win a majority of the votes. You just have to get more votes than the other. Majority, you have to win at least 50, you have to win at least more than half of the votes. Plurality, it's just as long as you get the most votes. So hopefully that makes sense. But it is used here in Texas. The majority, to win a primary, you have to get more than half. To win a general election, though, you just need to get more votes than the other opponent. So hopefully that makes sense. I can guarantee there will be a question on your test about the difference between plurality and majority. So be sure to be aware of that. Voting in Texas, we talked about the requirements for voting in Texas. You must be a U.S. citizen. You must be over 18 years of age or older. You must have had residency in the state and county for 30 days prior to voting. You have to present proper state identification when voting. And then also the other thing that I would add to here is that you must not be a current felon. If you're a felon and you've served your sentence, then you're fine to vote. And you also must not be declared mentally incompetent by a court of law. So as long as you're not declared mentally incompetent by a court of law, you are allowed to vote in the state of Texas. So I actually should have added these on here, but there are actually about 6 requirements to vote in Texas. U.S. citizenship, over 18 years of age or older, residency within the state and county for 30 days prior to voting, proper state identification, must not be a current felon, and you must not have been declared mentally incompetent by a court of law. So when I upload these slides later on, I'll be sure to add those, and you can go ahead and review those yourself. We talked about suffrage provisions just a little bit. I won't go over these. These probably actually won't be on your test. Just know that we have expanded through the U.S. Constitution. We have expanded suffrage within the United States. You can no longer bar voting based on race due to the 15th Amendment. You can't bar race, or you cannot bar voting based on sex to the 19th Amendment. You cannot require poll taxes, the 24th Amendment, and you can now vote if you're greater than 18 years, thanks to the 26th Amendment. It was previously 21 years or older, but due to the 26th Amendment, we lowered the voting age to 18 because if you can sign up for the military and die for your country, then you should be able to vote in your country as well. The Texas Constitution bars voting, like I said, by the mentally incompetent and current felons. So going back to the previous slide, let's go ahead and add these bottom two onto that previous slide. All right. Finally, we talked about Texas voter turnout. Compared to other states, Texas has a very low voter turnout. I can guarantee that will be a question on your test. It basically be something like, compared nationally, how does Texas voter turnout seem to be, or something like that. Texas has a very low voter turnout due to low socioeconomic status. People that have a low income or low education, they typically don't tend to vote. Texas has a lot of people that are low socioeconomic status. Texas is a very poverty-ridden state, and there's a lot of poverty within Texas. There's a lot of people that don't make a whole lot of income. There's also a lot of people that don't receive a lot of education, and so that's kind of the second reason here, is due to the poor education system. Not a lot of people are aware of the issues, or a lot of people don't know how to vote or things like that, and so that's one reason why Texas has a very low voter turnout. Third of all, it's a one-party dominant state. Republicans are probably going to win regardless of whether people vote or not. And so it kind of discourages people to vote from both Republicans and Democrats. Republicans don't want to vote because, well, they already know that their party is going to win. So why would I turn out to vote if my party's already going to win? Why would I take the time to go down to the courthouse, cast my vote, when I have already been assured that my party is going to win? And on the flip side, for Democrats don't want to vote either because what's the use? My vote really isn't going to change the election in any way. Republicans are going to win regardless, so why would I take the time to go and vote? So this one-party dominance in Texas has really kind of discouraged many people from getting out and voting as well. Registration difficulty. Texas is pretty difficult to register. I mean, it's not super difficult, but once again, it's just kind of the time factor and taking the time to do it. And then finally, the identification requirement in Texas has discouraged some people from voting, particularly me being from out of state, I guess. It's difficult to go get a new driver's license, particularly when your driver's license is still valid in another state or something like that. And then also just the fact that the applications and things like that for proper identification is time consuming as well. And so identification requirement, and also just another note on the identification requirement, I always found it odd in Texas that a conceal carry license is valid, but a student ID is not valid. That's also another thing that has kind of discouraged younger people, particularly those people that rely on their student identification, discourage younger people from actually getting out and voting as well. So, all right. This is the national chart to how Texas compares nationally. You see Minnesota over here at number 1. They're very proud of that fact. Wisconsin as well. But you have Texas down here in, I believe, 48th. Yeah, 48th overall in terms of voter turnout. So it is actually very, very low here in Texas. All right, finally on the last week here, week 10, political parties. I'll try to get through this pretty quickly so that way you guys can go study for your test, even though by watching this video you're studying for your test, I guess. But you have better things to do than listen to YouTube videos, and I'm sure your attention span for YouTube videos is pretty short to begin with anyways. So let's finish up with week 10 here, political parties. We talked about the definition of a political party. It is simply just organized groups that seek to gain office and exercise political power through legislation, executive action, and control of the government agencies. So parties are usually organized. They can't be loosely organized, but to be an effective party, you need to be highly organized. You need to be an organized group. All political parties seek to gain office, and all of them also seek to exercise political power. They want to seek power. They want to seek power and gain office in the legislative branch, in the executive branch, and they also want to control government agencies as well, meaning the bureaucracy. Parties are not actually in the Constitution, but parties do have a place in society. They feature a large network of supporters, including think tanks, individual supporters, corporations, trade unions, things like that. So parties are actually highly organized, and they're kind of an important part in the fabric of society, even though they're not in the Constitution. We talked about different models of party. We talked about the rational party model and the responsible party model, and we also talked about different meanings of parties as well. So let's go ahead first and tackle these models here. You first have the rational party model, and this one is the one that is used in the United States. Whereas in most of the world, particularly parliamentary systems, you have what is called a responsible party model. But here in the United States, you have a rational party model in which parties will sponsor candidates for political office. So if a candidate seeks a political office, they want to gain the sponsorship of that political party. That way they can declare themselves part of that political party and can usually raise funds and things like that for the political party as well. The party in a rational party model wants simple control of the government. They don't care that much about the platform. They just care that people under their banner got elected to a political office. Now, this disregard for political platforms contrasts the responsible party model. Instead of a responsible party model, you have parties that actually really care about the platforms. You have distinctive platforms from each party, and they carry out that platform when elected. This assumes clear ideological and philosophical differences between parties, and it assumes that people that are elected to office are actually going to adhere to the political platform or the party platform itself. So a responsible party model is much more focused on the party and not necessarily just sponsoring electable candidates. It's trying to gain government control and then carry out their goals. And that's why it's usually popular in a parliamentary system to do this, because in a parliamentary system, the party can expedite legislation. Whereas in a rational party model or a non-parliamentary system, it's hard to get things done. You just want solid people in office to promote your party and look good for the party banner. Now, parties have different meanings as well. So the rational party model and responsible party model tend to focus on the party and government. But let's first talk about the party organization. And the party organization is just the party as a kind of organized unit. It's the national headquarters. It's the people that are overseeing everything that's going on. And that's the party organization. The party of government is just the people that are elected into government that identify themselves as Democrat or Republican, that ran on the Democratic or Republican ticket. And then finally, the party and the electorate is all the card-carrying members, the party identifiers. That's the you and me. If we identify as Democrat or Republican, we're the party and the electorate. We're the ones that elect the party in government, and we're the ones that support the party organization. And so we broke this down just a little bit further in the lecture in terms of pig, pie, and po. We'll begin here at the top with pig. These are officials elected under one party banner. So these are the people that are in Congress, in the Texas legislature, the governorships, the presidency, things like that, that say that they are Democrats or that they are Republicans because they were elected as a Democrat or Republican. It's the party in government. The pie is the party in the electorate. These are just all the citizens who attach themselves to a political party. And then the PO is the party as an organization. This is the formal apparatus of the party. Like I said, the committee, the chairs and the national headquarters and things like that. So pig, pie, and PO. Remember that for your test, and you guys should be good to go. If you need any clarification about the distinct differences between the three, hopefully you guys don't. Hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. But if you do, feel free to send me your questions. All right. We talked about the different functions of a political party. We generally laid out 7 different functions of a political party. First of all, political parties are intermediaries between the electorate and government. Political parties can inform the electorate about what's going on in government. They can provide a kind of channel for dialogue and a channel to vent your concerns and demands and things like that from the electorate to the government and to the government to the electorate as well. Political parties recruit candidates. They want to recruit candidates that they feel can win. They contest elections and mobilize voters. They organize and manage government. They are accountable to the voters. They also partake in conflict resolution. Political parties will be a mechanism to talk to other parties and resolve conflicts within government. And then finally, agenda setting. Political parties will set the agenda and they will kind of set forth what issues they want to tackle in the next legislative session or in the next term or things like that as well. So the agenda is also very important. All right, moving on. We talked about different bases of party conflict. We talked about ideological conflict, and we talked also about interest conflict. Ideological conflict is just the fact that most parties do attach themselves to a particular ideology. Here in America, we tend to associate the Republicans with conservative ideology, and we tend to associate the Democrats with liberal ideology. Ideology is a huge kind of basis of conflict. They will fight along ideological grounds. Ideology is simply just a system of beliefs and values about the nature of society the relationship between government and economy, moral values, and the conduct of government. That's the idea. That's the definition of ideology. I will probably put that definition on a test because we need to think about ideology and exactly what it is. Ideology is different than party, but parties do attach themselves to a particular ideology, this system of beliefs and values about the nature of society and the relationship between the government and the economy as well. So you have conservative versus liberal, like I said, generally here in America, and they will often fight based on these ideological grounds, based on these deeply held beliefs. If you remember way back to week 1, when we talked about liberty and equality and how those kind of form provide cues about our own ideology, it's the same way with the party as well, because the party is often a reflection of the party and the electorate and widely held ideologies throughout the state or throughout the nation. But parties also conflict along interest lines as well. Interests are just simply something of value or some personal characteristic that people share that is affected by government activity. And these can be economic, social, and personal. All these are different types of interests. Remember when we talked about ideology and we broke it down in terms of economic interest and social interest, and whether you believe in liberty or equality on that? Those interests obviously inform our ideology, but it also informs parties and how they should fight for those particular interests. And so that's another reason why interests, economic, social, and personal interests, are a basis of conflict for each party as well. So they'll fight along ideological grounds, which are deeply held beliefs, but they'll also fight along interest grounds because those are something that is very personal to them and may affect their livelihood or their quality of living or things like that as well. So when you think about why parties fight, think about that they fight along particular interests, but they also fight along particular ideologies as well. So, moving on to particular parties here in Texas, we need to realize that we do have different eras or distinct eras of party history in Texas. The first one is the one-party period. This lasted from 1876 to 1952, when strictly Democrats were elected both on a local and a national level. From 1952 to 1978, though, we had what many will call the modified one-party system. Democrats were still being elected locally, but Republicans were being elected nationally. And this is because of the Southern Democrat kind of idea. Southern Democrats were actually extremely conservative, as Texas traditionally has been. But nationally, the Republicans were becoming the party of conservatives on a national scale. And so that's why Democrats were elected locally, because they were still many Southern Democrats. But nationally, Republicans were being elected because they represented the more conservative views that many Southern Democrats attached themselves to. So that would be the modified one party, where you'd still have voters voting for one party, but it depends on whether it's a national election or a local election. The two-party era from 1978 to present, I would even say that we've actually moved into a different era where we're back to kind of a one-party period with Republicans being elected so frequently here in Texas. But from 1978 to present, you have had a fair amount of two-party competition. You just need to look at what areas. Democrats are succeeding in urban areas. Republicans are still succeeding in more rural or even kind of suburban areas as well. So that's why this is classified as a two-party era. I believe your textbook also classifies it as a two-party era, because Democrats do still have some success, just depending on what area and where they're located and things like that. All right. We also discussed the difference between a major political party and a minor political party. Major political party, the thing you need to know is that they received at least 20% of the vote for governor in the last general election. And then the minor parties are just parties that receive less than 20% of the vote for governor in the last general election. So in Texas, we only have two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. The minor parties are the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, and other third parties as well. So those are the minor parties here in Texas. So major party, more than 20%, minor party, less than 20%. Should be pretty easy. All right. And then finally, I believe, that is our last slide. This is our last slide. Spoiler alert. So finally, we talked about party identification. I believe that party identification is very, very important for you to know as your test, particularly the definition. I want you to know that party identification is very unique because party identification is something that is psychological. Party identification is a psychological orientation, a long-term propensity to think positively of and vote regularly for a political party. And I find that fascinating because it is a very psychological thing. we as voters attach ourselves to a particular political party, and it's very rare that as soon as we've voted for a party that we're ever going to vote for another party again. It's a long-term propensity to think positively of and vote for that particular party for years, decades to come. So as soon as you voted Democrat once in an election, you're very highly likely to vote Democrat in subsequent elections. Same way with Republicans. As soon as you vote Republican, you're very highly likely to vote Republican for subsequent elections as well. You have a very personal identification with, and you generally vote for its candidates for a long time to come. Our party identification is acquired through a number of socialization processes, such as your race, your ethnicity, your religion, your family, and even your gender. All of your personal experiences, your socialization, your upbringing, inform your party identification, as well as your ideology. And remember that ideology is highly attached to political parties, even though not uniform. It's not the same as ideology, but it does inform it, and it does therefore inform your party identification as well. Now, there still are liberal Republicans, and there still are conservative Democrats, but because ideology and your socialization process inform your party identification, you can make a generalization at least about the particular ideology going along with a particular party. So that's party identification. I feel it's very important to know because you as voters, you as young voters in particular, need to think about how you're going to identify yourself in the long term. Do you see yourself being a Democrat for the rest of your life? Do you see yourself becoming a Republican for the rest of your life? Maybe even you're independent. Do you see yourself joining a particular political party in the future? Or do you want to remain independent? That way you're free to vote for the candidates as you see fit or things like that. So party identification is very, very important. I can guarantee there'll be a question about it on your test. And as we've already seen, this is the last slide, so I'll go ahead and wrap up the slideshow. If you have any questions about the test, maybe the format or what to expect on it, or you're having trouble with a particular concept, or you need further understanding of a particular concept, feel free to email me. You also have the help discussion board, which none of you have used yet, but feel free to use it. Email me, Skype me, whatever you need to do. I believe that you guys will do good on your test. I was very impressed with your grades last time. So with that, I will wish you good luck on your test, and hopefully you all do well.